The ABC's Boyer Lectures have sparked critical conversation since 1959. This year, world-leading technologist and anthropologist Professor Genevieve Bell explores technology, humanity, and the future of being Australian. 30 years ago, Professor Bell left Australia to study anthropology in America. That journey took her to the heart of Silicon Valley, where she led Intel's first user experience research and development lab, and most recently served as their chief futurist. Her job was to help invent the future and ensure that it was shaped by lived experience. Now, she's returned home, calling on us to reassert a human and Australian voice in our digital world. Here's Professor Genevieve Bell with the 2017 Boyer Lectures.
Each of us from the day he's born begins to deposit information about himself in various public and private files. By the time he emerges from school and the armed forces, the ordinary young adult cannot have escaped becoming the subject of at least a dozen personal information files. Our necessary social interdependence assures an acceleration at the rate at which personal data are accumulated and stored. Until yesterday, it's been manila folders. It becomes increasingly a computer record, which stores and organizes an ever wider range of data about each of us. In face of all the pressures and threats, I believe that the claim to privacy is a matter of great and increasing importance in our crowded society, with its unbelievable technological resource and inventiveness. A man without privacy is a man without dignity. The fear that Big Brother is watching and listening threatens the individual no less than the prison bars.
That was the 19th Governor-General of Australia and preeminent legal scholar Sir Zelman Cohen, delivering the Boyer Lectures in 1969. That's him 48 years ago, worrying about our futures and about the impact of increasingly smart computers and data collection on our lives. And if you can get past the gendered language, it sounds achingly familiar. But why start in the past? Why go back to 1969? Because sometimes it helps to remember that questions triggered by technology aren't new, nor are our concerns. They have legacies and earlier instantiations. And perhaps, just perhaps, we'd be well served to pay attention to those echoes. Over the past 3 episodes of this Boyer Lecture series, I've argued that our digital world is full of such echoes, that the ideas of fast, smart, and connected all have histories, contexts, and even countries. The stories of CIRAC, Douglas Engelbart, ARPANET, and Silicon Valley offer ways of thinking critically about the ideas of fast and connected, and about how Australia is located within those narratives. In this final lecture, I want to reflect on what has happened as our digital world has gotten smarter, and on what it means to be human in that same digital world. Specifically, I want to talk about artificial intelligence and algorithms, and about the history of intelligent machinery upon which those ideas are built. And I want to contemplate how, as Australians, we might navigate all that is coming. Just recently, I sat on a Melbourne tram travelling to St Kilda, listening to a man recounting his previous night's dating drama on the phone to an unseen friend. He said, "You just never know who you're going to meet on the internet, Linda." And I thought that sounded familiar. Nearly 25 years ago, a cartoon appeared in the New Yorker magazine. It featured 2 dogs. One dog, perched in front of the desktop computer, says to the other dog, sitting at his feet, "On the internet, no one knows you're a dog." The joke was almost opaque. After all, back in 1993, when that cartoon first appeared, the internet was still new to most Americans, and the rest of us too. Mosaic barely existed, and the first commercial web browser was still Netscape, still 9 months away. Digital life consisted primarily of email addresses and bulletin boards, where you were just a name or a handle or an IP address. As the cartoon implied, you could have been anyone almost anywhere. It was privacy, or privacy, through total anonymity. At least that was the conventional wisdom. The internet and the web it was helping to enable were seen as liberating spaces, where we could be reinvented, freed of our bodies, cultures and geographies and all of their constraints. We would be allowed to explore a different kind of space and a different way of being. Didn't quite work out that way. Over the last quarter century, the internet, the web, mobile phones and apps, and now algorithms have found their ways into our daily practice. We've moved from analog to digital and digital to data-centric. That data-centric world seemed benign at first. Smartness was there to help us. We gave up data about ourselves and the technology around us got smarter. Devices and services knew us, gave us recommendations about food and books and news and movies, helped us remember passwords and websites, made sure we didn't get stuck in traffic or lost. More recently, those same devices and services reminded us to walk more, to vote, to leave for the airport. They promised us better dates and hookups, better travel times and ticket prices, and cheaper data plans because we were in the airport, and advanced warnings for bushfires in our areas and reminders to take umbrellas and wear sunscreen. They help label our photos, curate our memories, and find our friends. And it turns out they've been shaping our conversations, our views, and our attitudes. Cohen was right. Computer records at a scale he could not have anticipated have ensured that much is known about us. The internet was not a place where we would be anonymous. It was instead a place where we could be exquisitely and absolutely known. If Peter Steiner had to redraw that cartoon today, it might read, "In the digital world, everyone knows you're a dog. And here are all the dog-related services you will enjoy. Plus, we ordered you more Purina One dog food because you're going to run out tomorrow. Oh, and it's time for a WALK. Somewhere in there, however, all this data-driven smartness started to feel just a little bit creepy. I am sure I am not alone in wondering just how that movie ended up in my movie queue, or why my ATM is wishing me a happy birthday, or more alarmingly, a happy anniversary with the bank, and how the phone company knows I'm leaving the country to offer me that cheap data plan, or precisely how my photo storage service knows that I'm in Alice Springs with a mate. Why do those moments feel creepy? Well, partly they feel creepy because it suggests those technical systems know more about me than seems right or appropriate. And because, as a result, I often find myself contemplating what else the system might know and where that information has been shared and what insights have been gleaned. It raises a whole lot of complicated questions. Clearly, Netflix, Wells Fargo, Telstra, and Google all know a great deal about me. And at one level, all that data, I volunteered it to them in exchange for services, access, convenience, and connectivity. But along the line, it stopped being about bits of information and became about what that information would reveal when it was accumulated and aggregated. And more significantly still, what larger patterns and rules could be discerned from my information and your information and a whole lot of other people's information. We've been reduced in this way to our past data and the patterns it produced. And once that knowledge set has been constituted, it can be automated. At its most crude essence, this is the work that algorithms perform. An algorithm is simply a set of instructions that tells a computer what to do. And as there's been more data and more patterns and more insights and bigger market opportunities, algorithms have scaled in unprecedented ways. And as that happened, it also became clear that algorithms are sometimes more than just a set of instructions. They are, in fact, reflections of how the world works. And as such, they're riddled with human biases and flawed logics. We've seen algorithms that were racist, sexist, heteronormative, violent, competitive, law-breaking, and aggressively American. And those are just the ones we know about. Of course, we've lived with more benign and almost invisible algorithms for years. Simple recommendation engines like Google, Amazon, iView, or Apple Music. Or more sophisticated versions in our navigation tools, our photo manipulation software, our ride and home sharing services, and social media platforms. Today, algorithms represent building blocks from which artificial intelligence is being created. This is the smart part of fast, smart, and connected. The idea of smart isn't so new, though. Turns out it's been around since the beginning, long before the internet and the web, and before our data-driven world and its current algorithms. It starts with the very first proto-computers all over the world. The technical specifications might have been about increasing speed, but our imaginings of those machines, they were always about electronic brains. It wasn't just about faster calculations. It was about the idea of making human-like intelligence with reasoning, thought, decision, and strategy making. It was also about a kind of reduction of our humanness to our intellect. In the UK, it's Alan Turing who sits at the centre of such conversations. Turing was a mathematician turned cryptographer and computer scientist who saw how algorithms might change the way computers functioned, even when they were still just electronic calculation machines. In his 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, he lays out a thought experiment in which a computer is pitted against a human and another computer must attempt to discern the difference. He called it the imitation game after the British cocktail party activity. Today, we call it the Turing test. His work asked and re-asked the same set of questions. Will machines think? Will machines reason like people? Can they fool us into believing that they're human? And ultimately, lurking beneath all of that, a subtler set of questions about what distinguishes people from machines and what might be the consequences of machinery achieving intelligence and the capacity for independent thought. Would that thinking be like our own thought processes, or would it represent a new form of reason? Turing's suicide in 1954 was a shocking moment, and the circumstances surrounding it, his persecution for homosexual activities and the chemical castration that was his punishment, caused a protracted pall to exist over his work and him and its singular importance. In the United States, this pall made it possible to contemplate the future of thinking machines and not talk that much about Turing. The term artificial intelligence owes its origins to meetings at Dartmouth College in the summer of 1956, organised by American academics John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky and Claude Shannon, amongst others. 6 weeks of shared work took place to help shape a new intellectual agenda. They described their shared work as follows. The study is to proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can, in principle, be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. An attempt will be made to find how to make machines use language, form abstraction and concepts, solve kinds of problems now reserved for humans, and improve themselves. Artificial intelligence emerges out of that 1956 summer, with a strong focus on modelling machines after humans. It relied on the work of American behaviouralist and psychologist B.F. Skinner, with his relentless quantification of our humanness, which he believed arose in response to external stimuli. Unsurprisingly for his time, he viewed people as mechanistic systems, reducible to electrical impulses and operant conditioning. This matters because the notion of human that Skinner theorised still pervades AI today. Replace stimuli with data and you see the same frame. IA is, at one level, just data in and data out, measurable and mechanistic. Just as Skinner rejected Freud and Jung and their messy human scale, AI now reduces us to a tidy set of knowable data. The AI research agenda also owes considerable debt to American mathematician and philosopher Norbert Wiener and his prior work on cybernetics, and to the Macy's conference, which, in an interdisciplinary way, helped make the case for imagining the role of computing machinery in our lives. And of course, it was all energised by and in direct dialogue with the strides being made in speeding up computing. Faster computers would be smarter computers. But as it turns out, not fast enough and not powerful enough and not sufficiently ubiquitous and not intimately located enough in our lives to learn about us from our data and to improve. In fact, until quite recently, it wasn't possible to get close to either Turing or the Dartmouth Group's heady imaginings of AI. The CEO of Google declared at a recent event that we were entering the age of AI. But the artificial intelligence that feels so suddenly new and present has clearly been more than 60 years in the making. It has waxed and waned and promised several revolutions. Giving it back this context is important. We should remember to ask ourselves, who helped set the agenda? What did they read and believe? Who funded them? What did they strive for? And why didn't they quite get there? After all, AI is clearly more than just a technology or a set of technical affordances. It's also an assemblage of cultural and technical things and human agendas. It was fueled by ideas about our humanness and our capacities, and of course our biases and our flaws too. AI is imagined as much as it is real. The promise of technology that's smart, that's the stuff of science fiction, not just science fact. Passing the Turing test is not just a measure of advancing computation, it's about machinery to replace us. As my friend and colleague Brian Solis suggested in a recent cartoon, on the internet no one knows you're a robot, as his robot types, yes, of course I'm a real person. Somewhere along the line, the dogs became robots. And our sense of the technological world and its possibilities shifted. We've been imagining human beings, human-like beings, powered by technology since at least CapEx robots in the 1920s. Or even Banjo Paterson's, yes, Banjo Paterson's 1891 cast iron canvasser. And probably since Frankenstein 2 centuries ago. The idea of raising a machine in our likeness is a lasting human preoccupation. But it seems the notion of things coming to consciousness is also riven through with anxiety. To suggest that computers might eclipse us, or that we could build a machine that would think like us, raises hackles. They're fears fed by our newspapers and our leading technologists. Elon Musk has argued that, quote, artificial intelligence is our biggest existential threat. And Stephen Hawking has written that, quote, the development to full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Only slightly more optimistically, Bill Gates said of the robots, quote, they will be benign for quite some time. Turing anticipated all of this fear way back in 1948, writing that the opposition to thinking machinery arose from, quote, an unwillingness to admit the possibility that mankind can have any rivals in intellectual power. This occurs as much amongst intellectual people as amongst others. They have more to lose. Those who admit the possibility all agree that its realization would be very disagreeable. So how should we make sense of the strange dystopian sort of dance here between utopian and dystopian ideals about our own technological futures? After all, we're bombarded at all sides by conversations about AI and a data-driven digital world. How should we navigate something that feels both polarizing and paradoxically lacking an appropriate sense of urgency? From some quarters, we hear that technology will replace us, even result in our demise. From other quarters, we hear that it is increasing isolation and depression, that it reduces our social encounters to a kind of instrumentalist swipe left, swipe right, and that everything is urgent, and that everyone knows everything, and that privacy is dead, and that our kids aren't safe, and that our jobs aren't safe. Of course, we also routinely hear that technology will create new jobs and new possibilities, and that we must retrain ourselves and send our kids to code camps, and that we can be connected in one amazing global community. Oh, and that we're creating new business models and new ways of being and doing. The reality, as ever, is more nuanced, more complicated, and ultimately more interesting for all of us. In many countries, fierce debates are raging about the nature and the impact of this data-driven digital world. Those debates are as much about ethics, morality, and cultural philosophy, and the world the technology appears to be creating, than they are about the technology itself. In the EU, they've recently rebooted the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies, and there have been ongoing debates there around data privacy and ownership, the right to be forgotten, and algorithmic transparency. New organisations have been chartered that range from foundations to consortia to industry partnerships. These include OpenAI, Partnership on AI, AI Now, the Data and Society Institute, and DeepMind's Ethics and Society. Some of these debates are touching down on university campuses and resulting in new curriculum and teaching methodologies. Harvard has just added coursework around ethics and technology, for instance. In American and European corporations, decision-making forums are arising around ethical deployments of new technologies. Google has an ethicist, and other companies have protocols and frameworks for tackling AI work. In Australia, over the last 12 months, we've had our own complicated encounters with the emerging contours of a data-driven digital world, involving the ATO, Centrelink, ABS, and most recently, ideas about facial recognition technology on a national and commercial scale. These have all received plenty of coverage, However, what we haven't yet seen is a broader debate about what they point to collectively. And this absence presents an opportunity and an obligation. How might we engage with this next instantiation of our fast, smart, and connected digital world? And what questions might we ask? What are the actions we could take individually and collectively? Is there a particular Australian thread we could or should follow? After all, we have a precedent for doing our own thing and supporting our own values and our own stories. Historically, we've backed ourselves with a bigger vision of what we stood for and the lives we wanted for ourselves, our families, each other, and our country. Things that wouldn't have happened without a bigger vision, and things that sometimes ran counter to market forces and conventional wisdom. Things like the Snowy Mountains Hydro Scheme, the ABC, the Sydney Opera House, the 1967 referendum, Medicare, HECS, superannuation, the NBN as originally planned, and I hope soon, marriage equality. Here, in this last of the Boyer lectures, in the spirit of sparking a national conversation, I want to end by suggesting there are 4 things we can and should do in our smart, fast, and connected digital world. Build new approaches, invest in the hard conversations, strive for accountability, and make our own Australian future. So let me unpack those one by one. Building new approaches. More than 60 years ago, Norbert Wiener wrote that to be successful in his world, his new world, either the engineers must become poets or the poets must become engineers. I think that thought still holds true. Indeed, the emerging data-driven part of our digital world requires us to think differently. We'll need new practitioners to tame and manage these new technologies, as well as those to regulate and govern them. Thinking through how to build a digital world in which we all want to live requires asking hard and thorny questions about the nature of our humanness and about how we might want to model that going forward. At the Australian National University, we're already working on this. As our only explicitly national university, I believe we have a responsibility to help build future intellectual capacity for Australia. Rather than just tweaking existing disciplines, we need to develop a new set of critical questions and perspectives. In this context, we've embarked on an ambitious plan to reimagine engineering and computer science for the 21st century. Our first initiative was to launch a new institute chartered to tackle this emergent, data-driven digital world. The 3A Institute, which I direct, aims to build a new applied science here in Australia, but in dialogue with global stakeholders. So it's a little ambitious. Well, actually, it's a lot ambitious, but I firmly believe it's possible. Elsewhere in Australia, other equally forward-looking initiatives are also helping build new centres of gravity, including the Digital Data and Society Consortium, which is bringing together researchers interested in social and cultural aspects of digital data, and helping put Australia at the forefront of conversations around the digital humanities, which is another important piece of the conversation about our future. But it will take much more than this. Working out how to navigate our humanity in the context of this data-driven digital world requires conversations across all the disciplines. In the university sector, we need to rethink how we fund, support, reward research, and also researchers. At a funding level, our privileging of STEM at the expense of the rest of the disciplines is short-sighted at best and detrimental at worst. Number 2, investing in the hard conversations. We need to invest in hard conversations that tackle ethics, morality, and the underlying cultural philosophy of these new technologies in our Australian lives. Do we need an institute or a consortia or a government think tank? I'm not sure. I suspect it would be a good start. What I do know, however, is that we also need to get beyond the framing of the conversation as AI will kill jobs and the robot apocalypse. And that's work on all of us. As you've heard from the voice memos and from the recent ABC study about smartphone habits here in Australia, we have a great deal of concern about our future and the role of technology in it. We have a responsibility to tell more nuanced and, yes, more complicated stories. Governments, NGOs, industry, the news media, every one of us. We also have a responsibility to ask better questions ourselves. We should be educated stakeholders in our own futures. And yes, this requires work and a willingness to get past the easy seduction of the killer robot stories. Perhaps one day soon there'll be the moral equivalent of the Cyro well-being diet for our technological encounters. Until then, the next time you hear the story about the killer robots, ask yourself, what is the history of this technology? Where did it come from? What are its vested interests? And who are its beneficiaries? And what logics about the world is it normalizing? And most importantly, what is the broader context into which it fits? Number 3, striving for accountability. Sir Solomon Cohen said that a man without privacy is a man without dignity. I'd argue that in the future we're building, there's little dignity in a life that's shaped by algorithms into which you have no say and into which you have no visibility. So should there be accountability, transparency, and openness? And if so, to whom? And where would we manifest that? Where is the duty of care for this new data-driven version of our smart, fast, and connected digital world? How do we build a world that's not about our worst impulses, but about our best? How could we help combat inequality? We should be actively developing an appropriate regulatory and policy framework for Australia that establishes our own viewpoint. Open questions here include, should Australian citizens, as they do in Europe, own their own data? Should we mandate that algorithms are subject to review and scrutiny, even if they're built elsewhere and by commercial interests? Should we require, as we do for new drug treatments, that they be appropriately tested before they're released here? And how do we ensure that our regulators and policymakers fully understand these new technologies and infrastructures? We ask board directors to be certified financially. Perhaps we should ask our regulators and politicians to be certified technically. And number 4, making our own futures. I'm tempted to suggest there's one simple question here. Do we want to be Australian in this new data-driven, smart, fast and connected world, or just another colony of some transnational commercial empire? Of course, it's not that simple, nor should it be. But it is the case that algorithms and the data-centric world they help build are manifestations of cultural values and logics that arise in very particular places and very particular contexts. Whilst it is certainly the case that there is a robust debate going on in Australia currently about what our value sets might be, I think it's safe to say we might want to embody our own values in the data-driven digital world around us. For me, those values include things like fairness, equity, accessibility for all, social justice, and civic society. So should we build Australian algorithms? Yeah. In fact, we already are. But it's not without its challenges, including regulation, oversight, and accountability, and open questions about whose values we are modelling and how we could debate that effectively. And of course, there are bigger questions too, about the role of technology more broadly. I think in this new data-driven, smart, fast and connected world, we might have lost more than our privacy. In making the machines smarter, it seems, we sacrificed a little something of ourselves. We run the risk of being reduced to data and the decisions it drives. I believe we're more than data, more than Skinner's stimuli, more than just intellect. I worry that in our current focus on the digital, we've lost a little something of our agency and some of our sense of what it might mean to be human. But I don't believe that's inevitable or irreversible. It's sometimes tempting to talk about the future as if it were a different country. But to quote William Gibson, the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And if it's already here, that should galvanise us into action. I know that our digital world is threaded with ideas of smart, fast and connected. And those ideas already have a history and a trajectory. I also know we can still shape that world and make it into a place that reflects our humanity, our cultures and our cares. We've done so before. We can do it again. It requires that we enter a conversation about the role of technology in Australian society and how we might want to navigate being human in a digital world. I think we have a moral obligation to do just that, to shape the world in which we might want to live. And that's why I came home. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this year's Boyer Lecture from Professor Genevieve Bell. If you missed the first 3 lectures in this series, you can find them on the ABC Listen app.